Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's presentation. This week, we're going to look at organizational communication. This week, we're going to talk about communication in organizations, and I've based the framework for this from the chapter on organizational communication in Julia Wood's Communication Mosaics, which you've read, and I've used some of those terms and concepts. However, a lot of this information is from my own research because I am an organizational communication scholar and I've done a lot of research and I've been teaching organizational communication for a very long time. And I included my own artwork in this presentation. So that's my drawing behind there that I did, and you'll see different renditions of it throughout here. Alrighty, so let's get started. I have an inside tip for you to start. So in the communication studies discipline, we call organizations orgs. We call communication comm. So we call organizational communication orgcom. So you are now an insider in the discipline. You know that when we say orgcom, that means organizational communication. And it's so much easier to write orgcom. So much shorter. Alrighty, insiders. So we're going to ask these questions. What is org culture? How do rituals and routines express org values? How do today's orgs differ from those of earlier eras? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of personal relationships on the job? The presentation itself contains the information about what constitutes organizations and organizational communication, an overall description of organizational culture, and then some guidelines for communicating in organizations effectively. Some features of organizations. So organizations have structure. They also have networks and they also have links to the external environment. So we're going to talk about each of these separately. For the structures, you have hierarchical structures, flattened hierarchies, and you have collectives. We're going to begin with hierarchical structures. So hierarchical structures are very old. You can trace them back to ancient cultures such as ancient Egypt. They built the pyramids, hence the pyramid structure here, right? So the hierarchy has the the authority structure where the person at the top has the most power and the most responsibility. So that's typically your presidents or your CEOs. And then below that, you have vice presidents and other, people with that. Like in a university, they might be called a provost. Then you have directors, then you have managers, and then you have line staff. Okay. Now there are different terms for different people in the organization, and there's additional terms to indicate different levels of authority. But basically, the higher up you are, the more power you have, and the more responsibility. The lower you are, the less power and responsibility for the overall functioning of the organization. So there you have it. Now, the types of organizations that have hierarchical structures are corporations, universities, government, military, religious institutions, and large nonprofits. Other organizations, small ones, could be hierarchical. You could have a family that's hierarchical, but they're more common in these larger organizations, and it's much easier to coordinate and control the functions of an organization hierarchically when it's large. Now, I just want to share this about the C-suite. So these are people who would be at the top of particular departments. And originally you just had a CEO, but then they added chief financial officer and chief operating officer in the 50s and 60s. But as more and more areas of expertise developed in the modern world, then you had more and more chiefs of different functions, right? So you have chief information officer, chief technology officer, chief marketing officer, and so on, right? So I just wanted you to be aware of these, and I listed them all out so that you would understand what these are in case you come across them, and to know that a lot of large organizations have some of these positions there. And also that if you want to be at the very, very top of your field, then you might be striving to have one of these jobs as your dream job. The type of structure that exists in hierarchies is in large hierarchies is a bureaucracy, right? So a bureaucracy is a system of coordination and control. How do you coordinate? How do you get the functions to work together efficiently? Okay, and how do you control it? Those are the things that all organizations must have a system of coordination and control. So bureaucracies do it in these particular ways. So they have formal rules, hierarchies, and procedures. They're characterized by a clear chain of command, a division of labor, and standardized processes. They emphasize efficiency and accountability. They aim to reduce ambiguity and ensure consistency, and they assign specific roles and responsibilities to individuals within the organization. This enhances the coordination and control, and it aims to apply the rules fairly and consistently throughout. I wanted to compare bureaucratic and autocratic rule for a minute because there is a problem in our world of a rise of autocracies. And some people think that might be a good thing. I want to point out what the differences are so that you could be very clear on it. And if you're interested in learning more about the increase in autocracy, there's a book called Autocracy Inc. by Anne Applebaum, which is an excellent book that explains it really, really well. So on the left-hand column, we have aspects, and then we compare them to bureaucratic and autocratic rule in these columns to the right. So the first aspect is consistency. So bureaucratic rule has high consistency because decisions follow a specific set of standards, whereas on autocracy, there's low consistency because decisions based on the whims of the ruler, whatever they feel like doing at any particular time. The aspect of fairness in a bureaucratic rule promotes equity, whereas in autocratic rule, it risks favoritism and bias because that person doesn't have to apply the same rule to everybody. Transparency exists in bureaucratic rule. So you know what the rules, you know what the policies are. At CSUCI, you can go online and you can search for our policies and they will pop up on the screen, right? You can always know what our policies are. With autocratic rule, these policies are transparent, or I mean, they're opaque. You can't see through. You don't know what they are. They don't have to be published anywhere. The ruler can do whatever they want. With adaptability, there's less adaptability in bureaucratic rule. So when people ask for exceptions to the rule, they're less likely to get it. And that is one of the things that people get upset about because they always feel their circumstances are significant and important and they are deserving of an exception to the rule, but it's really hard for that to happen in bureaucracies. Whereas an autocratic rule, it's easier because the ruler can just do whatever they want, but typically they'll only have exceptions to the rule for the people they favor. With trust, it develops in bureaucracies because of the predictability. If you know what's going to happen, you're able to trust more. Whereas with autocratic rule, it undermines trust because of the unpredictability. You never know what's going to happen. Depends on the mood of the autocrat. With accountability, it's easy to evaluate compliance in bureaucracy because you have rules and regulations and then you have policies and procedures to do the evaluation, right? You've seen it at the end of every semester, you have to evaluate your classes, right? That's for accountability. Make sure your professors are doing a good job. Department chairs get evaluated. The deans get evaluated. Everybody gets evaluated, right? And you get evaluated. That's what your grades are, is you're being evaluated constantly, right? So that's accountability. With the autocratic rule, they don't have to share that how they're making their decisions about evaluating with anyone. It's just up to them what they want to do. So it's difficult to hold them accountable when they can do whatever they want. Now, in a bureaucracy, you have what's called the chain of command. And I created this chart and it's based on it could be any school, but let's just say it's arts and sciences because that's where we are right now. So you have at the top, you have the dean, then you have your department chairs, then you have your faculty, and then you have your students. So the red arrows are the indication of where the communication happens. And that's what we mean by chain of command, like who talks to who and who gives who the directives or the instructions about what to do, right? So faculty and students have an arrow between them. So faculty talk directly to students and students talk directly to faculty. And if you had an issue with the faculty, your the first thing that you're supposed to do, according to the policies of our university, is to try to talk to your professor about what happened and try to clear the problem up with them. If that doesn't work, then you can go to your department chair. And then you could see how the department chair handles it. And then if the department chair handle doesn't, feel satisfied, you could go to a dean. But there's an what you're actually supposed to do is to file a grievance. And so if you look up online, you can pull up forms for a grievance if you have a complaint about a professor, and you can file a grievance, and then it goes to a committee. So in bureaucracies, you have this chain of command. You're supposed to talk to certain people, and you're not supposed to jump over the different levels unless it's warranted. So you typically just talk to the people directly above and directly below you. So that's the chain of command. And the critique of bureaucracy is that it's inflexible, that it's slow to adapt, that it's overly focused on rules, and it can stifle creativity and innovation. So that cartoon on the right is reminiscent of Charlie Chaplin's movie that made fun of the modern organization. It's called Modern Times, and he makes fun of factories and bureaucracy in there. And this picture is kind of reminiscent of that, probably based on it. So that's the critique of it. It can be frustrating and so on. So it's not for everybody. Some people, personalities are not suited to working in bureaucracy, which is why it's really good to do those assessments through the Career Center to see, what your personality is and what's the best match for you with the type of organization you should be in. So because of the critique of it, you have in more contemporary times, you have what are called flattened hierarchies. And in a flattened hierarchy, you have fewer or no levels of middle management. You have open communication and collaboration, and the employees have more autonomy, more control. And it's common in sectors where innovation, creativity, and flexibility are valued. An example, a really good example, is Zappos shoes. So the CEO, he really believed in flattening the hierarchy, and uh, his office and the people that worked around him, he put himself in the center of the office. He had his own cubicle in the very, very center, so anybody in the organization could come talk to him, and also so he could hear what was going on. He didn't want to be separated from them, right? Typically, in a hierarchy, you have the CEO is going to be in an office, like in a suite with a great big view on the top floor, right? They're going to have this great big room with great big chairs and desks, right? Creating a lot of separation from the rest of the people in the organization, right? So, and that's one of the symbols through the manipulation of the environment that they have more power and authority, right? So, Zappos CEO did away with all that, putting himself right in the center and then having everybody's offices around him, and anybody can talk to anybody, and there's no managers. Everybody is just a team member at Zappos Shoes. So you can look at that at the video of Zappos Shoes to see what I'm talking about. Some industries that have flattened hierarchies are technology startups, creative industries, gaming and entertainment, research and development, nonprofits and NGOs, hospitality, retail, education, open source communities, agile consulting firms, and co-working spaces. So if you think you prefer a flattened hierarchy, you could look to work in one of these kinds of places. And if you wanted to work in a technology startup, they have different kinds of people that work there, right? So you have human resources people, you have finance people or accounting people, right? You have marketing people. So all kinds of people work in these startups. You don't have to be a technology person to work in a technology. You don't have to be a programmer or whatever the technology is, right? They have lots of different people that run these organizations. So that's flattened hierarchy and the kinds of organizations. Now we're moving to collective. So collective organizations are democratic, and so the emphasis is on shared decision making and equality. Nobody's the boss. Everybody has an equal say. I worked in a collective. That was my first job out of college, working at the San Francisco Common Operating Warehouse. We had different people who had different areas of expertise. So we had like the bookkeepers, we had the marketing person, we had the buyers, we had the person who was in charge of the floor operations every day. But we had meetings every week where everybody got together and everybody talked about whatever the issues were for the organization, and everybody voted. And we voted by majority rule. There's other collectives that vote by consensus, so everybody has to agree before they implement anything, and that is very time consuming. But that's the way some operate. So there's open communication, and another thing is that there's equal pay. So the pay structure is based on there's a starting level, and then you get merit pay raises as you keep working in the organization, and everybody gets the same pay. So the pay structure is exactly the same for everybody in these kinds of collective organizations. There's more and more of them, and there was a grant in California to try to promote the development of more of them, and we actually have quite a few of them in California. So I mentioned I worked at one, and then I worked in a system with a lot of different collectives, the People's Food System. And I was a truck driver and I would deliver food to all the other collectively owned stores there. And we even delivered from San Francisco to the East Bay and the South Bay. We had quite a reach. And there was quite a system of these co-ops then. Now, some collectively owned businesses today, this is a list of them. And there's New Era Windows Cooperated, Cheese Board Collective, Rainbow Grocery. This is one of the places I deliver to. I deliver to Rainbow, and they still are thriving. They're thriving and competing head to head with Whole Foods. Ours is Mendy Bakery, Equal Exchange, Davis Food Co-op, Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing, Cooperative Home Care Associates, Namaste Solar. I actually did some consulting and training for Namaste Solar. I helped them with conflict resolution. They are located in Boulder, Colorado. Black Star Co-op is pub and brewery is in Austin. Clean Wash Mobile is, I think they're located here in LA. Courage Home Care and Collective Avenue Coffee. Collective Avenue Coffee is located here in Los Angeles. So I provided this source for you. You can look these up to learn more about collectives, but you could just Google collective workplaces and you could find lots more and get more information if that intrigues you and you think you might want to work in a collective. Now, moving away now from structure and into networks, we have two kinds of networks. We have formal and informal. So bureaucracies have formal networks, so they're structured, they're planned, they're hierarchy based, they're role dependent, and they're governed by policies. Some examples of formal networks are organizational charts. So you have the official reporting relationships such as the CEO to VPs, managers, and staff. So I already kind of talked about that chain of command. Then you have workflows and processes. So the tasks are assigned and they're escalated or completed within a team or across departments. So that's a kind of network. Then you have meetings and committees. So you have scheduled team meetings, department reviews, and formal project committees. So people working within each of those different groupings, those would be networks. And then you have official communication channels that happen. So you have networks of people emailing each other, memos, company newsletters, or project management tools like Jira or Trello. Okay. In the first one, when I said the organizational chart, so the networks that exist are between the people that report to each other. That's what I mean by that, to clarify that. Alrighty, so that's the informal networks. We move now to the informal networks. So informal networks are unstructured, spontaneous. They can cross across hierarchy or across departments. They're dynamic, they're flexible, there's very high trust, and there's high influence. Because people trust each other, they're more likely to be influenced by each other, right? So here's some examples of that. You have social connections that form through bonding over shared hobbies or sports, right? You have lunch breaks where people get together and you have team outings. So those are ways that social connections can happen. Sometimes there's mentoring relationships. So an experienced employee offers guidance to a junior colleague, even if they're not in the same department. And it's done on the basis of liking when it's informal. If you get assigned a mentor, then it falls into the category of the formal, right? But this is informal. So it's when an older or a more senior employee offers guidance to a junior employee. And that's another kind of relationship that's informal. Then you have knowledge sharing. So members can be collaborating on a problem through unofficial channels like Slack, WhatsApp, or casual conversations. And then you have influence groups. So employees who naturally emerge as influencers or thought leaders due to their expertise or charisma could be creating a network and influencing people. So those are some examples of the informal networks. Now that we talked about the networks, we'll move to the last area, which is the links to the external environment. And there are a lot of different links that organizations have, and all organizations exist in the context of a society with lots of other organizations. So these are some of the very common links that organizations have. So you have strategic partnerships and alliances. So our university has strategic partnerships with community organizations, with government organizations, so on, right? You have relationships with your suppliers. So in your supply chain, and or another word is vendors, people that sell you the stuff, right? Those are relationships that you have. Then there's your customer and your client engagement. So those are people in the external environment that you heavily rely on to stay in business, right? Then you have your regulatory and governmental compliance. So people that make sure that you have proper health and safety regulations being followed, that you have the environmental controls, building and safety and so on. So all of these things are regulatory agencies that exist. You have industry associations and professional networks. So I belong to the National Communication Association, and most professors belong to one of these. People in other types of professions like human resources, that's a profession where lots of people belong to their professional association, and professional associations where people meet other people in their field and get new ideas and listen to speakers and get information for continual growth in their field, right? Then you have community engagement and corporate social responsibility. So you have an example is corporations that reach out and start mentorship programs and bring in high school kids to learn what it's like to work in whatever their industry is. Like I know Boeing works with a lot of high schools and brings people in to get introduced to engineering. And then corporate social responsibility, doing things to try to help the environment that you're situated in and the organizations there, right? You have technology and innovation organizations, media and public relations, academic and research collaboration. So we are an academic organization, and we work with other organizations, nonprofits, as well as corporations. Then there's global and multinational engagement, monitoring, adapting to environmental trends and corporate networks and ecosystems. So why am I talking about this? Well, these are all things that people in the field of organizational communication study. And it's good to understand this because as a person that may work in any type of organization, I don't know where everybody's going to end up, but just to be aware that your organizations have all these relationships, right? It's not just this isolated silo of an organization that doesn't relate to other organizations. Moving now to organizational culture. So culture consists of ways of thinking, acting, and understanding. And in the workplace, that would be understanding work. And this this way of thinking, acting, and working is shared by all the members of an organization, and it reflects the organization's distinct identity. So you see this when you come to school, you see certain ways that you interact and certain ways that professors interact, and other people on campus, right? And that could be very different than the way people are interacting where you work or where you go to your doctor or your dentist, right? So all different organizations have different ways of communicating, different ways of doing their job, different ways of connecting with people and so on, right? So these are reflective of their culture, and organizations since the 90s when they discovered and started to really think about this, that by really concentrating on your culture and thinking about what makes a strong culture, what makes your organization a model in its field, right? People are putting a lot of emphasis on culture, and it's become something that's really important to organizations. So there's lots of books on it. One of the first books that came out was a book called In Search of Excellence, and that's one of the books that help people understand that, hey, organizations are cultures. So we need to understand those cultures and communicate with them, and then we can also improve our cultures. How do organizations convey their culture? Well, we're going to look at 5 slides that deal with this. Okay, so some of the things we've already talked about is structures, rules, and roles of organizations. And I just wanted to distinguish between a rule and a policy so you understand that, right? So a rule is a specific directive or requirement that governs behavior or actions within the organization, whereas a policy is a broad guideline or principle that's set by an organization to shape decisions um, and actions. And you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is in alignment with the goals, values, and mission. And then finally, networks, we've just covered networks, so I don't have to go into that again, but these are the things that help to convey culture. So second slide on conveying culture is vocabularies or the way the language that people are using. So I wanted to start with talking about a couple of the concepts from Julia Wood's book. So she talked about hierarchical language and masculine language. So these are concepts that feminists started paying attention to. And as I explain them, now I've come up with my own examples for these things. And as I explain them, you'll understand why they're significant and why there's people researching it and critiquing it. Okay. So some examples of hierarchical language. First, you have titles and positions. So things like manager, supervisor, director, executive, CEO, team leader, and so on, right? It tells you that the organization is hierarchical. So the implications are that you know the level of the authority and responsibility or the rank within an organization. And the other implication is that everybody is ranked, like everybody's has status and, higher or lower status within the organization. So that's, indicates hierarchy. Then you have reporting lines. So who do you report to? I shared this concept of chain of command, and then you have the concept of subordinates. So the hierarchical implications of this is that the phrases emphasize the flow of authority and accountability from higher ranking individuals to those that are lower in the hierarchy. And then the last area of the hierarchical language is the decision-making authority. So you have words like final approval, top-down directive, or executive decision, right? So the hierarchical implication is that the concentration of decision-making power is at the higher levels of the organization. Having finished talking about the hierarchical language, now I'm going to talk about masculine language. So, language in organizations can reflect and reinforce a masculine culture when it emphasizes traits, norms, and values traditionally associated with masculinity, such as competition, dominance, assertiveness, and hierarchy. This type of language can create an environment that prioritizes these traits and that comes at the expense of inclusivity or diversity, right? So let's look at the specifics of this, all right? So you have competitive and aggressive terminology. Some language that could be used is let's crush the competition, let's win at all costs, let's be a killer closer. The implications of these kinds of phrases is a focus on competition and aggressive goal achievement. It's linked to masculinity and it can marginalize people who value collaboration or mutual success, which are actually seen to be very effective and often more effective than competition. An example is a sales meeting emphasizing dominating the market or destroying competitors. That sets the tone of aggression over cooperation. Next, we have hierarchical and command-oriented language. So some language used as chain of command, take orders, or follow the boss. The implications are that it reinforces a rigid power structure, which is often associated with patriarchal systems and may discourage open egalitarian communication. An example is leadership discussions that prioritize authority figures with the final word and reflect the top-down and male-dominated leadership style. Next, you have sports and military metaphors. Some language used are level the playing field, or it's a war out there, or hit it out of the park. So these metaphors prioritize competition, strength, and battle-like perseverance, aligning organizational culture with traditionally masculine domains like sports and military. Example is a team project is described as a full court press or or a launch into virgin territory. And that makes it harder for non-sports enthusiasts to connect with the metaphor or non-military people, right? All right, so next you have dismissive language towards emotionality or collaboration. Some language used is leave your emotions at the door or don't be soft or be tough. And this language devalues emotional intelligence and collaboration, which is often associated with femininity, and it prioritizes stoicism, and resilience. Some example is a manager discouraged employees from expressing burnout or personal challenges, reinforcing a culture of emotional suppression. Some gendered expectations in descriptive language. Here's some examples of that. Man up, grow a pair, or he's a natural leader. So the implications of this kind of gender language is equated with strength and leadership, and that gets connected to masculinity. So it makes it harder for women or non-binary individuals to feel valued or recognized for their contributions. An example is a female employee is told she's too emotional for leadership, while a male appears assertive as where the male is considered assertive and is praised as decisive. It can also hurt men in that if they're seen as being emotional, then they're not considered to be masculine. So it can hurt any gender, but it has this masculine bias to it. All right. So the impact on organizational culture of this masculine language is that it can alienate women and non-binary individuals and men who don't conform to traditional masculine ideals. For example, a man who's not into sports. It can reinforce bias, so it perpetuates stereotypes that men are naturally better suited for leadership or competitive roles. And it can be a barrier to diversity because it discourages diverse perspectives and undermines the importance of emotional intelligence, collaboration, and inclusivity. What you're seeing in a lot of organizations is a move towards more inclusive language. So what you do is try to use neutral or collaborative language such as teamwork, shared success, or aligning of goals. You avoid gendered phrases and metaphors tied to aggression or dominance, and you encourage expressions of empathy, emotional intelligence, and mutual support as cultural values. So this shift helps the environment become a place where all employees can feel valued and empowered. And actually, a lot of the organizations that are moving in this direction are finding that it also helps them be more productive, which means that it's also more profitable. Alrighty, so now we're moving to conveying culture through stories. So there's three kinds of stories: the corporate stories, the personal stories, and the collegial stories. The corporate stories are stories that reflect the values, history, and vision of the organization, and they're often used to reinforce the company's identity and inspire loyalty among employees and stakeholders. Some examples: the founding stories, like how this company got started. Oh yeah, it just got started in a garage. Then you have stories of overcoming significant challenges to achieve success. Um, and then you have stories about the company's mission or the core values. So those are all the corporate stories. The personal stories are those told by individuals within the organization to illustrate their own experiences, challenges, and accomplishment. So these stories can give us insight into that particular person, but also tell us about the values of the company, right? So a leader could share their career journey to inspire employees. An employee could recount how they successfully resolved a problem or contributed to a project. And there could also be anecdotes of personal reflection and growth. So those are your personal stories. So next we have collegial stories. So these are describe the informal relationships and behaviors and norms among colleagues, and they often provide insight into how things are really done, right? The real story, instead of the official story. And they can be inclusive of the unwritten rules and the workplace dynamics. Examples: a colleague sharing tips about how to navigate workplace politics, stories about teamwork or collaboration that highlight interpersonal dynamics, and narratives that offer advice about working with specific individuals or departments. So in sum, we have corporate stories and personal stories and collegiate stories. And all of these are ways that the corporate or the organizational culture gets expressed. All righty, next we have rights. So you have rites of passage, rites of integration, enhancement rights, renewal rights, and conflict resolution rights. So let's take a look at these. All right. So um, rites of passage are those that mark transitions of individuals into the organization. So examples are an orientation program that helps people understand the organization's cultures, policies, and procedures. Promotion, so celebrations or announcements when employees move to a higher position. And then finally, we have retirement ceremonies. So these are honoring the employees that have worked for their career or a good part of their career and honoring the contributions that they made. So those are rites of passage. Now we move to rites of integration. Rites of integration foster unity and reinforce a sense of belonging to the organization and belonging with other members. Some examples are the annual company picnic or parties, where people attend to build camaraderie, team building activities like retreats or workshops or group outings to strengthen interpersonal connections, and then finally you have celebrating milestones. So acknowledging company-wide achievements like meeting financial goals or anniversaries. Next, we have rights of enhancement. So these recognize and reward achievements. That helps to boost morale and it reinforces desired behaviors. Examples are Employee of the Month awards, recognition, recognition banquets. So a banquet that's held in honor of somebody with a significant accomplishment, or public acknowledgement. So announcing individuals or team achievements in meetings, newsletters, or emails, or posting a poster of Employee in the Month, that kind of stuff. Renewal rights reinforce the organizational values and refresh commitment or implement changes. So examples of that are strategy retreats where leaders gather together and refine the organization's goals and directions. Rebranding events like introducing a new logo or a mission statement or company focus, or training and development programs. So workshops or courses designed to renew employee skills and align with the organization needs. Last but not least, we have conflict resolution rights. So these are ways of managing disputes or disagreements in an organization. One type of conflict resolution right is mediation, where you have a neutral person who sits and listens to two people having a dispute and is neutral. So they try to help people listen and help people figure out their own problem, own solution to their problem. We have an ombudsperson on our campus who does this. Not that many people know about him, but he's there, and you can do mediation here. Next, you have team conflict resolution workshops, so where people get together and learn how to address problems. And then you might have termination meetings. So if somebody quits, you might have a meeting with them to find out why they quit, and then figure out ways to maybe fix that kind of situation so more people don't quit. So each of these different types of rights play a role in shaping the culture and expressing it, and they can express specific social, emotional, or operational needs, and together they continue building a cohesive, high-functioning workplace. The last thing we're going to look at is organizational rituals. So these are events that occur regularly, they're familiar, and they're routine, and they could be personal, social, or task-oriented. So an example of a personal ritual is starting your day with a cup of coffee while you review your to-do list, checking your email, that kind of stuff. A manager might start every meeting with a motivational quote or reflection, or an employee could, straighten out their desk as a way to focus before starting their tasks. So if you do them, very, very regularly, then it turns into a ritual. Social rituals are rituals that foster connection and camaraderie among employees. So celebrating birthdays or milestones with your team, having weekly huddles or happy hours, participating in annual events, or, even just like routinely maybe meeting for coffee or having a coffee break together for 10 minutes. So then you have task rituals. So these are related to the completion of work tasks and processes. So these could be regularly scheduled meetings. They could be the end of the day ritual, like reviewing, completing tasks and setting priorities for the next day, or they can be formal processes for starting or ending a project, like a kickoff meeting or a post-mortem review. These rituals combined help to create rhythm, structure, and social bonds that contributes to productivity and workplace culture, and it boosts morale. All right, so we covered this topic of organizational culture. We're moving into this last area of digital media and organizational communication before I give you some guidelines for effective communication. So, digital media is much more pervasive across all types of organizations, and they have increased our productivity and efficiency, typically, not always, but that's the goal. For example, right, by having all your information online, you can get answers to questions within seconds, right? That is so efficient. Um, we also have technologies that increase flexibility, so people can work from near or far. Uh, and we have, at school we can do Zoom meetings when we can't meet in class and so on, right? So that's a real advantage. And then it enlarges our range of contacts, so we can talk to other people and get information, and we can do that with online different kinds of platforms, as well as in face to face, or I mean, within your organization, like emailing people or having Slack or something like that to communicate with people in your organization. So these are all the advantages of digital media that have really changed organizations. And I can remember working and going to school without email and without websites right now. And now we have them. And so it's so much easier for students to get their materials, to, check the syllabus when they want to, and find out what's going on, email your professor and so on, right? So it really has made communication a lot easier, but it does also create problems because it can be a distraction. So people at work can keep checking their social media instead of focusing on their tasks. So it's really important to set limits on that. Like, save it for your break. Don't be doing it during work, because it lowers productivity, and it frankly it broadcasts that you're not a very committed employee if you keep doing that, right? Alrighty, so we've covered that topic. So we're moving to the last area, which is the guidelines for effective organizational communication. So these are the guidelines that Julia Wood had, which are to adapt to diverse needs, situations, and people, to expect to move in and out of teams, and to manage personal relationships on the job. I created another set of guidelines that are broader and more specific, and it's for both managing conflict and managing change. And sometimes those two things go together. So the first guideline is to maintain a positive mindset. Anytime you approach change or conflict, think of it as an opportunity for growth and learning rather than as a threat. That will really help you a lot. Remember the limits of perception. So that was chapter 3 in our textbook. It talked all about the limits of perception and the self-serving bias. So always engage in a dual perspective. When you have conflict, try to understand where the other person's coming from, their experiences and their feelings, and try to dialogize that, right? So the next one is fostering communication. So engage in open dialogue with your colleagues and also with leadership. Share feedback and insights, and listen to that feedback as well. All right. Seek clarity. So ask questions to clarify other people's perspectives, their expectations, and their experiences. Enhance your flexibility. Be open to new processes. Be open to new technologies or to workflow changes, right? And remain adaptable to these evolving conditions. Things keep changing at a faster and faster pace, so we just really have to get used to change. Develop new skills. So if you keep on developing your skills, you'll keep pace with the changes. It makes you a valuable employee and makes you, um, it helps to prevent being fired because you're not keeping up, right? Then you have building resilience. So cultivating your own internal abilities to cope with stress, right? Develop mindfulness practices or stress management, and also time management techniques are really, really important. Network with your peers. It's so important to do that. It helps you in your specific organization, and it helps you if you have to change organization. So collaborate with colleagues, share your experiences and solutions for adapting to change, And then focus on the big picture. Understand the change has aligned with organizational goals as well as your career objectives. So think about that too. And then be proactive. So volunteer for roles or tasks that can help you integrate into new environment and demonstrate your adaptability. The last page here says to embrace lifelong learning. So that's important for your career at one organization and also for you to be able to keep advancing your career across different organizations. Leverage feedback. So be open to feedback. A lot of people are defensive. Think of it as information, and then you can do what you want with that information. Cultivate patience. So recognize that adjusting takes time and allow yourself room to adapt gradually. Seek support. So utilize your resources such as mentoring, counseling, or employee assistance programs when they're needed, and then celebrate the small wins. Don't wait till, for, major, major changes, but look at the good work you're doing and acknowledge your own progress and celebrate that. So that's the end of my guidelines. The summary then of what we talked about today is we've covered structure, communication networks, and links to the environment. We've looked at aspects of organizational culture, including rules, roles, stories, rights, and rituals. And then we've also looked very briefly at digital media and its influence on organizational culture. And then finally, we covered the guidelines for communication in organizations. I hope that this organizational communication information serves you well in your own careers, and I look forward to seeing your work this week.